Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. Again, Thursday, January 25th, 2024 at 1:06 in the afternoon. And so we're here to just have an overview of reports, the reports that Department of Labor has submitted. So we have Cameron Wood with us. Thank you, Cameron, for joining us this afternoon. Appreciate your time and your ability to come in on short notice to go over these reports with us. And I think, Lynn, see if you can make him a co-host so he can share his screen. Or where you need to.
I might need to.
Okay.
I just brought it with me in case I needed to look something up. Yeah.
Okay, and
All right.
I think those should be posted to our webpage as well.
Just to jump right in, for the record, my name is Cameron Wood. I'm the Policy and Legislative Director for the Legislative Affairs Director for the Vermont Department of Labor. Happy to be here this afternoon. I'm going to go through three reports that were submitted this past Friday. They were due January 15th. It's a little delayed in formally getting them in. We got them in last Friday, so they are dated January 19th. One of the reports is related to the work that was done in this committee and passed by the body regarding the apprenticeship statutory update that we did. The other two reports that I'll walk through are related to the unemployment insurance program. One of them is the domestic and sexual violence survivors transition utilization, and then a report regarding expansion of UI eligibility for those who need to separate for urgent, compelling, or necessitous circumstances. And I'm going to take them in that order. I'm going to start with the apprenticeship report. Unfortunately, Jay Ramsey, our Workforce Development Director, was not able to be with us this afternoon. So I'm going to do my best to walk through some of the work that they did. But, you know, if there are questions I can't answer, we may need to just have him back. So that is in a memo format. It's about 17 pages. Throughout the late summer and early fall, we had multiple conversations with the Office of Racial Equity. As you all remember, this bill kind of went very quickly through the body at the end of the session last year. And one of the things that I think this committee wanted to have done was to have that office kind of review the language and make sure that some of the definitions we were using and the focus on ensuring, broader access to apprenticeship programs, and equitable access to those programs, wanting to give that office the ability to review and comment. And so because we were not able to get that done during the session, you all asked us to work with them on this report during in between sessions. So we met with them multiple times. They reviewed the language and really kind of dove deep into it. I really want to thank Susanna and Jay Green and their team for the work that they did. I mean, they went through the bill, which was quite extensive, line by line, and pointed out a lot of really positives for us. And so what we've tried to do in this memo is really outline the changes, but also the rationale for those changes. And so that's why you see it in this format, where we've got the section on the left, the text there in the middle, the original and the change, and then the rationale there on the right. As I was going through this in preparation, I realized I probably could have done a better job of highlighting the actual language changes, underline, strike through, et cetera. So I apologize for that. But I'll just kind of quickly walk through them here. And I probably could bring this up, but I don't know if I have a Zoom invite. Perfect. So I will try to talk and bring that up at the same time, but I'm not going to be successful doing that. 1 second. So the first three changes that are in the memorandum are really clarification on definitions. So as you can see, the rationale there on the first one, adding clarification about non-traditional population, referring to people who are historically excluded from certain occupations. So there's a little bit of change there. Apologies, I am not used to Zoom, so there we go. Okay,
Even larger.
yes. Better?
There.
Perfect. Okay, so what we have here is, removing the apprenticeship word and just having non-traditional population. But what was also added was just to clarify that these are individuals who have been historically excluded from various occupations. So just kind of a clarification to that definition. The second change was in regards to non-traditional apprenticeship industries or occupations, and the recommendation from ORE was just to baseline this. So programs as of 2023. So that's the only change there in that definition. And then when we get to the third, it is in regards to underserved communities. And there's a few changes here. ORE identified that one of the concerns was defining in here, it says persistent poverty. And as you read through the rationale, that's actually there's a formal definition, I believe, that's from the Census Bureau about what persistent poverty is. And this was interesting to learn. According to them, there isn't any areas in Vermont that are defined as, persistent poverty. So we wanted to take out persistent. It has I guess, a formal legal term or definition that the census uses. And so they recommended that we remove that, and we're supportive of all of these changes as a department. And then they also wanted to clarify, and I'm getting here to the top of page 7, the rural areas. They wanted to clarify that these could impact individuals through lack of access to transportation or high-speed internet. The next change that they recommended be made was regarding the new American status and the use of that term. And their recommendation was to change that to be individuals with language access needs, so not wanting to limit it to just new Americans. And I need to make sure I'm following along here. So it would be here. Language access needs. They also recommended adding birthplace. So these are in the strategic planning. And when we provide our strategic report, we're supposed to break the program information out. So this is, part of our report has to include an analysis of apprentices in the programs disaggregated by this information. And so we had new American status. They recommended changing that to be a little broader for individuals with language access needs. And then they also, recognizing that birthplace was not there, they recommended adding that. The other change in this section was in regards to the date of the report. So currently, I think the first report is due in 2024, or we have to disseminate a strategic plan once every 5 years beginning 2024. The federal government has issued proposed rulemaking for the apprenticeship program, and they're recommending, or part of their proposed rule is to have a strategic plan beginning July of 2026. So we're going to amend that to provide you with an interim 2-year report, but then move out the beginning of the strategic report to align with the proposed rules at the federal level to begin in 2026. There was a recommendation, this is on page 7, to expand the duties of the board to add that they can, this is bottom of page 7, top of page 8, make recommendations with an equity lens to ensure the program is addressing barriers to participation, and also that the board could strengthen relationships with community partners that serve underserved populations and historically marginalized communities who have not previously accessed apprenticeship. So it was their recommendation to specifically call those out for the board to support the department and the program in those efforts. There was the next section, page 8 and 9, just clarification on some fields that they would like us to clarify. Some are optional and some are required. If you look at that section, it's just listed that the apprenticeship agreements have to contain all of this information. And there was some concern, for example, around requiring social security number for individuals who may not have a social security number. And so they recommended breaking these out, saying that the apprenticeship agreement shall contain optional fields for X, and then having required fields for the things that must be included in an apprenticeship agreement. Quick clarification there in that section 2, Jay wanted to add that where we say that we are requesting this information to conform with Federal Equal Opportunity Act, he wanted to add also for compliance and apprenticeship program reporting and analysis. Next change was in what the programs have to provide. This is just in alignment with what we were referring to earlier, changing this from individuals for whom English is not the primary spoken language to individuals with language access needs. That's just, keeping in line with the change that was recommended before. There was also a concern that was raised about the current section says that the department is providing technical assistance to these entities, and part of that is to groups who are excluded from access to high wage careers is the language that we used. So it is right here. Other groups who are excluded from access to high wage careers. There was a concern that that's not defined anywhere. And so I think the department, our team working with ORE, kind of recommended changing that to careers with wages above the median in the state, because that is something that we can actually point to and say, here's the median wages in the state, and here are careers that are above that, as opposed to just a term of high wage careers. So if there's questions.
Yeah, and could you scroll up?
Yes, sir.
A little bit. And it was under the data gathering further up,
Yes, sir.
and you include the word color.
Yes, sir.
Why color when race can more easily define quote unquote color?
I may not be the best person to answer this, but I believe that individuals may identify as different colored, irregardless of what race they may be. I am not, as a white male here, probably not the best person to be able to speak to this and what other people may identify as or experience. So I'm happy to take your question and maybe get clarification. That is current language. That is what we passed.
The point that I want to make is, you say you're Caucasian, 99.9% of the time you're going to be white. If you say you're African American.
I agree, but I do think in a lot of,
Yeah, but it's just, fix it out.
but I do believe in, no, I'm gonna hold my thought. Yeah,
Just on this point, because I work with Ray,
Jay.
God, my brain. Anyway, back to the regular programming. These are categories actually that are within federal law that line up with protected classes. And so some of these things hopefully will evolve over time, but that is actually where these categories came from originally.
If I remember right, we had the same questions last year when we were doing this.
Okay, so that's the changes that we're recommending based on the work with ORE. And again, I just want to, I know they're not in the room, but I just want to extend my appreciation to them again. Both Susanna and Jay in particular, they joined us multiple times for conversations, many of which I wasn't even a part of. And I know they gave a lot of time and really dug into this with us and gave us a lot of thoughtful feedback. So that's on that section. Then the report kind of talks a little bit about the work that we also did with the Agency of Education. There was some concern about youth apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship and how these things can impact individuals who are currently going through high school or CTE, et cetera. So Jay has ongoing frequent meetings with the Agency of Education on this topic and others. And so over the summer, they also just started to kind of work through this language. There were a few quick recommended changes. One actually from the ORE was about, let me get to the right page on the screen. Not wanting to exclude individuals who may be home study students. So I think if I recall in the youth apprenticeship section, it talks about individuals who are high school students. And they identify that there could be individuals who may be doing home study or may not actually be a traditional in the high school student. And there was just concern that using that term may be excluding others who could also be in a pre-apprenticeship or youth apprenticeship program. So, yeah, I'm gonna pause there. One thing I wanted to comment when I spoke with Jay about the continuing work with the Agency of Education, we really feel like that's going to be more of a long-term goal that we're kind of slowly working towards. Some of the things that we're still working on, trying to put the infrastructure in place from the changes that you all made last year. We've passed along our recommendations of board membership to the governor's office, and we're working through that, trying to get individuals appointed. And we're still looking to onboard additional positions within the Department of Labor, the apprenticeship director, and there's also, I believe, a staff person in that program that we haven't yet hired for. You all may remember Jay was the apprenticeship director, and he's now moved up to be the workforce development director. So there was a vacancy there. So, we're continuing to try to build our capacity and continue to work with Agency of Education on these topics in particular. He wanted me to make sure that I was just giving a quick update on that. Okay. Questions? I can jump to the next report.
I came in a little late. This is a continuing program?
This is, if you recall, we operate the apprenticeship program. And so we worked with you all last year to do a very comprehensive update to the apprenticeship statutory language. And part of that was including for the first time a definition of youth apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship and requiring standards for those programs. Previously, one of the concerns that we had raised without that statutory change, those weren't defined in statute. They weren't defined in the apprenticeship program. And so we were concerned about individuals, entities, using youth apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship without having clearly defined requirements of what those programs are.
So is there data that you have that measures the results of the program thus far?
I don't know about youth apprenticeship. I know in the workforce development report that Jay submitted, and I know I think we walked through it a few weeks ago. He also included in that the apprenticeship report that's required that you all put in statute based on that statutory rewrite. So he put all of the information that we had available to us on the current apprenticeship programs in that report. I don't think we have data built out yet on youth and pre-apprenticeship. I think that's something that they will be working towards.
Thank you.
So these are rules, or these are coming back to us to update the law?
These are our recommendations coming back to you to update the statutory language.
I'd love to take lead on this one when we're ready.
Find a vehicle for it.
Yep.
Which
I will say,
could be the UI bill. So,
I will say, I don't think any of this is must have. It's things that we would like to get done. I just,
Super logical,
Yep.
it makes sense, it's really,
Yep.
yeah.
so.
drafted this last, David? Yeah, David did.
I was working with David, yes, sir.
Check with Jen. I think she probably would want Rick to do this, but just double check with her. And then maybe you Cameron and Rick could get together with Jay and just get it drafted so it's ready to drop in.
I will shift gears quickly because we're at 125 and I know these other reports, I imagine we'll have a lot of discussion. So the next one I want to talk about is the report regarding utilization of the Domestic and Sexual Violence Survivors Transitional Employment Program. So again, we submitted this just in a memorandum format. The request from the committee was wanting to look at utilization of the program over the past 10 years. And what has the department done over that same time period to help promote the program, and any recommendation for legislative action coming out. And so this one is a relatively shorter report. It's only 3 pages. But we did go back. We were able to pull the information on the number of claimants that we've had over the past 10 years. So we included that going back to 2013, as well as the amount paid in benefits for each of those years. As you can see, for many years, there was no utilization of the program. I should be clear. What I was not able to go back and get was the number of applicants. So this is just the number of individuals that were approved under the program and paid benefits. So I wasn't able to go back and figure out how many people may have applied, requested information, or were denied. And 2023 last year, we had 3 individuals. And so then in the second and third page, we just kind of talk a little bit about what we have done as a department, both in the past and subsequent to conversations that we began with the committee last year. I believe it was in, maybe I didn't put the year in there. Oh, there was. So we've always had information available in our claimant handbook. I think one thing that was pointed out to us last year was not having a lot of information available on our website, which we worked to update, and we're actually still trying to work on that. There's in conversations with the Vermont Network, wanting to provide more information on our website about supports that aren't necessarily related to this program. And we've also had some conversation with them about how we can get information available about our program through their websites and through their channels, et cetera. We've always had information in our claimant handbook. And then for those who were new to the committee back in 2019, we actually updated our unemployment insurance mandatory poster to include information about this program. So for you all who may not be aware, there are required mandatory employment posters that must be posted in all workplaces. One of those is a poster related to unemployment insurance, how individuals can file for unemployment insurance. Prior to 2019, there wasn't any specific information on that poster about this program in particular. So this committee wanted us to make that change. And so we did. So now that poster has information specifically calling out this program and how individuals can apply. Excuse me. So we did make that change. We've, for the most part, always worked with the Vermont Network when, they've reached out, or, I will not say there's ever been a, ongoing concerted effort to always reach out and continuously collaborate with them. But we have always, worked with them when they've reached out to us. Otherwise, we spoke with them during the session last year, and we had a few conversations with them during the summer. And we actually had staff go to their meeting in June to, discuss the program and grab feedback about ways that we can continue to collaborate with them and improve information sharing. From there, kind of been working with them. We've reached out to the Office of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, and that's kind of one of our planned big next steps, was to try to work with their office to have a conversation with all of the sheriffs and state's attorneys' offices, as well as the victims, I may be getting this phrase wrong, the local victims advocates office, to try to, give them a presentation and an update and, materials that we've developed about the program. So if they're working with any victim in their local area, they hopefully can be able to provide them with direct information. So that was kind of our hopeful next step this fall and into the spring.
Mm-hmm.
Still trying to work with the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs on a time frame that works best for them on how we can do that. The other thing that we did, we've developed this, and I did not send this to the committee. I scanned it to myself when I was on the way, but I wasn't able to get it via email over to you yet. So I'll pass it along. You can all have it. We worked with the network to develop this one pager here, which just provides information on the program and also provides updated, resources that are available to people if they're experiencing some sort of domestic or sexual violence. So it's got, the Vermont Network, it's got their information, hotline information, et cetera. We're beginning to send this one pager out to every individual who files an initial claim for benefits. So again, this is, the information is in our claimant handbook, but it's buried in the claimant handbook. And so we wanted I don't know if that's the internet or where that's
Relay
coming
happens
from.
every
But,
day.
okay. So we wanted to have a specific, one pager that individuals will get. So if they call us, even if they're not indicating that they're under a circumstance that may qualify them for this program, they're at least getting this one pager when they receive that packet of information.
Last year when we were talking about, unemployment claims,
Mhm.
we had recommended that when you go to file or, not filing, log in to unemployment benefits, we had recommended if you put it as a header that was highlighted if you're a victim of domestic violence, and it pointed them in the right direction, and that was true then. Is that still true?
So what we did do with the committee last year is we began to specifically ask the question on the initial claim. And so, in kind of talking with the committee, we kind of realized through discussion, one of the challenges that we ran into, or we felt that we were running into, is not being able to identify the individuals up front. We would find out that they were under some sort of domestic or sexual violence circumstance way down the line of them applying for benefits. And we were concerned about the delay. We were concerned about potentially not identifying individuals who may be in these circumstances. So we started to ask the question on the initial claim. And we have been doing that ever since working with this committee. We have very limited functionality and ability to provide information on our claimant portal. And so that's not something that we've been able to do, but it obviously something that we will be wanting to include in our modernization effort, is how do we make sure we can put this information available to people electronically.
So those numbers that preceded this page,
Yes, sir.
do those reflect those people that logged in at the portal?
So what we did was, right now, when you file your initial claim, you have to call us. And so we're not able to do it kind of like online right now. And so as part of the customer service agent, as part of their script, when they're working through and filing someone's initial claim, they ask them, we developed a script for them to read, and they are asking the individuals at the initial claim if they are in if they've separated because of a domestic or sexual violence circumstance. I don't have the script in front of me. We have identified, so the positive, or a positive of making that change, we've identified, I think the number that was given to me before I came was 47 individuals who have answered yes to that question since we started asking the question. As you can see, that we've only had 3 individuals that have been eligible. There's a host of reasons for that. Some of the individuals are not monetarily eligible. And so if they're not monetarily eligible, we can't move them into this program because they don't have wages in their base period to give them a monetary amount. So we wouldn't be able to pay them anything. We have some individuals who and I guess I should explain the process first. When we ask the question and someone answers yes, that allows the supervisor to then pull that claim out, make it priority for a fact-finding process, because they have to be denied regular unemployment before they can be determined whether they're eligible for this program. So we're able to kind of identify them, prioritize them, and then if they're deemed eligible for regular UI, we're then able to go immediately to fact finding for this program. So we've had 47 individuals indicate yes. Some of them are not monetarily eligible. Some of them we've identified that they may have experienced a domestic circumstance or sexual violence circumstance in the past, but it wasn't directly related to the separation. Therefore, they wouldn't be moved into this program. Some of the individuals are deemed eligible for regular unemployment, in which case we don't move them over. And then we've had some individuals that we've identified, we've reviewed them for eligibility, and we've denied them for one reason or another. And that actually is one of the reasons, as you'll see in our legislative recommendations, that's one of the reasons we're actually recommending doing away with this program and moving it into the regular UI system with some changes.
One more comment. When you say fact finding, are you searching or asking them to provide court documents and
Yes.
documentation
Yes, sir.
with law enforcement? So you're not having to do that.
Well, one of the things that we do ask for is there any police report or documentations, et cetera? We do ask if that information is available. If that information is not available, we do just take basic fact finding on the circumstances. We ask for them to provide us with an affidavit of the information, et cetera. We try to be as least invasive as possible. But we do, under the statute, we are required to ask if there is police reports or documents, et cetera. So we do ask for them. And obviously, if they're able to present that or give that to us, that kind of alleviates the need of needing to investigate further. But if that information does not exist, then we do have to, kind of go down that fact-finding process with them and gather more information.
Thank you.
Total number of claims in 2023.
Ooh. I will, related to this or total UI claims?
Total UI.
I will get you the number. I don't have it off the top of my head. Estimate, I would say probably over 20,000. I think if I recall off the top of my head, I believe last year we issued, I think it was 16 or 17,000 1099s. So those are individuals that were paid.
Right.
So that doesn't include individuals that were deemed ineligible. So just using that would be my immediate guess off the top of my head, would be more than 20,000 people have applied, but I can get you the number.
And you initiated asking people every time.
Mhm.
It wasn't early in the year. So the three, just would be interesting about when you initiated
I think
actually asking the question.
we did it during the session. I don't think it was in January, but I'm wanting to say maybe March. Because it was in collaboration with this
Yeah, I
committee that we did
remember.
that. So it was most of the year.
Thank you.
Eric?
Yes, so in regards to the 2023 data, is it possible to have all that data put up in a chart by any chance? Because one of the, and I don't want to say issue with it, but one of the things, especially with the numbers, is that it shows 3 claimants.
Mhm.
But the fact that we had 47 people actually reach out under that particular umbrella of services, I think that's phenomenal. That people were
Yeah.
reaching out. And the other thing with the numbers too is that you have 3 claimants underneath that initial program, but as you mentioned yourself, there's individuals that were also shifted into regular unemployment claims, even though they reached out citing under domestic abuse. So I'm just really curious what the whole picture is regarding the numbers, because it's hard to make assessments regarding this program if we're not, quite frankly, having all the numbers showing the entire data set.
I agree, and I want to make sure you all know the one of the biggest challenges we have with this and with the next report is data collection and accurate information. What I mean by that is this is an entirely manual program, and it's one of the other reasons that at this point we're recommending just kind of moving it over into the regular UI system. For example, of the 47 individuals that answered yes, I don't even know at this point if I would be able to tell you how many of those were deemed eligible for regular unemployment. If they're deemed eligible for regular unemployment, we don't go any further. And so it could have been a false positive. I'm not even sure that's the right term I want to use, but they may have answered yes incorrectly, and we're not going to know. I imagine that there's also a lot of people who probably aren't answering the question because they're talking to someone, and for whatever reason, they may not be comfortable answering that. So yes, there's a lot of information that I think we can try to pull together to be able to provide. It becomes very challenging to data mine it because it's all manual. And like I said, for a lot of it, it's if they're deemed eligible for regular UI, we drop it because we don't have the capacity to spend more time investigating.
I appreciate it. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to make sure, especially with the data that's presented before we end up moving forward to any particular recommendations, that everyone has a whole picture regarding the actual effectiveness of the program.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Thank you.
And another thing that we don't have that's, unfortunate, like we started asking the question, this is the first year that we've asked. So
Mhm.
like, I don't know, that's the baseline at this point. So I don't know what it could have been before that. I don't know if 47 is lower than what it would have been in the past, if that's
Mhm.
more than people that have inquired in the past. I simply don't know. I think one of the concerns that this committee has shared and we echo, there appears to be, I don't know that there's any, causations that you can kind of extrapolate from this. The numbers of individuals that experience some sort of domestic or sexual violence event in the state far outweighs the number of individuals that are even indicating yes for a separation. I don't know the answer as to why that's the case, but that I think is one of the big concerns. So.
Thank you. Thanks, Karen, for this, because I think this is a really, first of all, I've appreciated that the department has really taken to heart that this particular program has been severely underutilized. I mean, 13 people over 10 years is eye-opening. I'm glad we finally have like numbers around that piece. And I appreciate also the recommendation ultimately in this report to make the program part of just the regular UI system. I imagine, because simply even just, as you were just saying, calling and the challenges of when someone's in a controlling abusive situation, the inability to have like privacy and ability to do those things is often really restricted. So the ability to have a little bit more access to something that in theory might be a little bit easier to access, online claims, simply by being put into the main program, I think could really open up this program even more. My one question is, and I don't mean to jump ahead to the next report because I have some other questions about that report, as you might imagine. You obviously did reach out to other states and look at other states. And as the other report actually indicates, a lot of other states have this program as well. I'm curious, even if you haven't, in regard to the other report, there must be other things other states are doing around trying to make sure that program is, their programs, whether they're integrated within the regular UI program or not, are being much better utilized. And I'm just curious if that, even if you haven't had that, but that could still be the next piece we do, is to really learn from other states around other pathways people can find to this program. And last thing I'll just say is I imagine that 47 figure is going to be even higher. Again, part of this is culture, right? Awareness and culture rolling out and becoming known by even more sheriffs and folks in victim services, et cetera, will continue to push that number of where it needs to be, really reflecting the reality out there. So I'm just curious if you did have any insights from other states, though, just for that question.
To answer that question directly, we haven't had the chance to reach out to them yet. As you identified, we at least know who they are now. So we can have direct outreach to them. We individually can speak with counterparts when we're at, conferences or meetings, and we can start to have those conversations to build on that. Absolutely. So I think the first step of recognizing them and we can make steps to access their knowledge and experience and what they do. Last thing I'll comment on this report, and I'll move to the next one because I know the next one is kind of, I think the largest one as far as broad topic. We are recommending going to move this over into the UI program. I know that is counter to what I said last year when I was here. We went back, we talked to our team after the session. We had some really frank conversations with them about what are the challenges related to this program. Does it make sense to move it over? What would the benefits be for both the customer and for the department? And after having some frank conversations, I moved off my position and, I think in listening to them and talking it out, I think we as a department feel that the customer would be better served, and it would be more efficient for us as a department. It would allow us access to more funding. And what I mean by that is our admin funding in particular. One of the things that becomes very difficult for us as, some of you may know, when you give state programs to us, it becomes very challenging when, we're not really legally allowed or authorized to use our federal dollars to cover state-run programs. So, some of you may remember, Mr. Chair, you probably in particular, we used to administer the healthcare assessment for employers that don't, provide access to healthcare for their employees. There's a contribution that they have to pay, and we used to administer that in the unemployment insurance program. And we had to work with the federal government on identifying. Had nothing to do with the running of regular unemployment. And so those things become challenged. And so for us, we've identified that the current structure, we feel it will be a lot more customer for us if we can just do a fact finding once based on their separation, as opposed to trying to determine whether they're eligible for UI. And then when they're not, then moving them over to a new fact finding process. If we were to add a separation due to a domestic or sexual violence circumstance as a voluntary quit, as an exception to that in the UI program, we feel it would allow us to just go through that process once, not have to do it twice. I will also say whether, this committee and the body want to move it over in particular, we've identified some individuals that we felt separated from employment due to a domestic circumstance, but because of the nature in which the program is currently written, we weren't able to support them. And so, I want to be careful of the time here. I'm happy to deep dive on this later with anyone and the committee in particular, or the committee if you want me to come back. We've had some people who we felt separated because of, like I said, a domestic situation, but it wasn't a voluntary separation. And so they were not eligible for UI, but we also were not allowed, based on the way the statute is written, we were not able to move them into this program either. The program in particular, it says, Mr. Chair, you're looking at me funny. The statutory language says it
because of cause.
they were let go because of, they were let go from employment. I'll leave it at that. It was not a voluntary separation on their part, even though we felt that the circumstances leading to the issue that led to the separation was a domestic violence circumstance. I don't want to go into too much detail. It's actually an open case we have, but
It's either voluntary or
involuntary. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So
So happy to talk further about that. And again, our goal, I think, is continuing to work with the network, continuing to try to build on what we've done to make sure, as Representative Mulvaney-Stanek mentioned, I think one of the key pieces here is just a culture of awareness. And so that's what we're hoping to do moving forward.
there's something that changed on the federal side that allows us to make changes to the UI program to allow for a voluntary separation because of sexual violence or
I don't know if anything changed or what the circumstances was when this program was initially created. Way before my time in the department and probably before my time even in the state. Knowing that, I think there are, it's in the other report, there are, it's 20 or 30 other states that have some sort of similar provision. In our research and talking with our federal partners, there's nothing that prohibits us as a state from allowing a separation because of a domestic circumstance to be eligible for UI, even if it's a voluntary quit.
I think that's why we created this program was because it was a voluntary quit, that they weren't eligible for UI.
Right.
And so something must have changed somewhere along the way where the Fed is allowed for, under these circumstances, allow, and so, I mean, I'm all for that. I think it makes a lot of sense. Does that also give you better data collection on what's going on and how many, I mean, as long as they're forthcoming and the reasons why they were.
I don't think it's going to give us any better opportunity in the immediate term with the system that we have. But, when we get to our new system, we will be able to collect a lot better information. I mean, I was talking to our associate director just before coming here and we were talking about this and I said, listen, if we made this change right now, are you concerned about our ability to administer it with the mainframe? Like what it said, like here are the things so you all understand like that we struggle with, right? If you want to allow an issue type in the like we break all this stuff out by issue type. When you file for unemployment and it goes into our mainframe and an issue needs to be reviewed, we have dozens of codes that things are given. So we understand, oh, this is a 07 code, that's a voluntary quit that's adjudicated. So we can understand what the issue is in the system. We don't have the ability to create anymore. We don't have the ability to change them, et cetera. And so I don't know that our data collection is necessarily going to get better with the systems that we have now, but absolutely with a new system. I mean, ideally, as we were talking, initial claim, the individual is able to file it online, and this is just a reason for you have to identify your reason for separation. You've either voluntarily quit, you've been laid off, you've been fired. Those are the current options that you can choose, and we can just have that as a drop down and add this as one of them. You've
So within
separated because of
voluntary quit, there's specifics in there. And there could be an issue with bosses.
We would ask, I mean, so like with the new system that, we will have, it will be able to ask dynamic fact-finding questions at the time of initial application. That's one of the problems we have too now with the adjudications process. As you all know, it can be very lengthy because we gather just the basics information at the front. We don't gather anything else. So we know you have a voluntary quit and that's what the system says, but now I have to go through the fact-finding process. Where with a new system, when we're asking these questions on the initial claim, you say you voluntarily separated. Now I can key off 5 other questions and I can ask and get information. So that way, when we get the initial application, hopefully somebody can review it then and there and be able to move the process along a lot more quickly.
Just one question though, back to my favorite topic, the mainframe. So we can add this category?
Not in our mainframe now.
So can we not add this right now? Or we can add this right now?
We can move. I don't think there's any concern from our end about moving the program over into regular UI and allowing people to be eligible in that program. If that doesn't mean that I'm going to have a lot more data. It's still going to be a lot of like manual tracking of information. And so like what I won't be able to do is I won't be able to go into the mainframe, query for a voluntary quit because of a domestic reason. I won't be able to tell you that.
But we can make this policy change and the mainframe can handle it because it will just trigger their normal fact finding, which this will be one of the allowable reasons under our policy making. And then at some point, the mainframe will do that. So we can make policy to add.
You could make this change now and effective 2024. And I don't think we have a issue or a concern about being able to manage these claimants in the mainframe. That's actually one of the problems we run into now administratively, because technically the individuals are supposed to be filing weekly claims. And so there's a disconnect when the claimant, we identify you're not eligible for regular unemployment. You voluntarily separated. And so they'll stop filing for benefits. And then when we find out later and we're able to identify them as potentially eligible for this program, by the time we get there, technically they're still supposed to be looking for work. And so then we potentially run into an issue where we have a month or 6 weeks of you didn't file any claims. And so then we have to either try to manually file them. It's a barrier or a challenge that we then have to administratively work through. If you move the program over and they're just filing for regular UI, they're just going to keep filing their weekly claim. We're going to adjudicate it once. And if we identify it's a voluntary quit for this reason, we go through the normal fact finding process. And then you're going to get a determination you're either eligible or not. If you're not, or if you are, then you would just continue to file as you would anyone else.
I think I'm 100% on board for putting this into the regular program. I'm just clarifying the mainframe is not a factor here. We can add this and there's not an issue with adding this policy change.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. 5 or so.
We got, we're not stuck for time.
Okay, and I'm not either.
We
So
have until
I'm
3 o'clock, so.
I'm here till you no longer want me in the room. The next report is looking at UI eligibility for quote, urgent, compelling, or necessitous circumstances. This was, language that was introduced in a separate bill during the session. And we had discussions with the committee, initially brief discussions about this. And I think there was, concern about lack of information to be able to make a policy decision about whether or not this should be, whether this eligibility, whether UI eligibility should be expanded to include these circumstances. And so you all asked us to work in collaboration with JFO, do some research on what other states have, and come back to you. And so we as a department tried to give you a comprehensive report. So we have an executive summary at the front, summary of the legislative request itself. And I should pull this up on my, we're still working, okay. So you all specifically asked us to bring a report back that includes a list of states for which individuals who separate due to circumstances similar to those described in the section and the H-92, I think was the original bill, information regarding the number of approved claims and benefits paid, an estimate on the projected range of additional approved claims in Vermont for individuals who may separate for these circumstances, an estimate of the potential impacts on the UI trust fund, and any recommendations for legislative action. So the next section, I kind of just wanted to phrase what the current law is regarding voluntary separations, because if you remember, bringing us back to last session, bringing us back to H-92, this is about expanding UI eligibility to include coverage for individuals who voluntarily separate because of an urgent, compelling, or necessitous circumstance. And the language in the bill specifically says including needing to take care of an ill family member, lack of or loss of child care, due to a domestic or sexual violence circumstance that was included as well. And I think it was also to care for yourself if you become ill. And so I just wanted to frame what the current statutory requirements are related to a voluntary separation. So as a general matter, if you voluntarily leave your job, you are not eligible for unemployment. The program was designed to be there for individuals who lose their job through no fault of their own. And so if you voluntarily separate, you then would not be eligible for the program. This is federal law. Every state has this. There are certain circumstances that states have identified where individuals may voluntarily separate and still it is appropriate to be eligible for unemployment insurance benefits. In Vermont, we have one circumstance that we've identified, which is the individual has separated because the individual is, so it's right here at the top of this page. They leave employment. She didn't do that. They leave employment to accompany a spouse due to active military relocation or due to a U.S. Foreign Service assignment. That's not a direct quote from the statute. It's got a little more information in it, but essentially, if you voluntarily separate and you can't show that it's because of the employer, I should have clarified that a second ago when I started. If you can demonstrate as the claimant that you're voluntarily quitting your job for good cause attributed to the employer, you are eligible. So what does that mean? So if I'm usually working day shift, my hours are 9 to 5, and my employer comes to me one day and says, I'm switching you, you're now working 5 to 9 or, whatever it is. If you're unilaterally changing the employment agreement as the employer and I quit because of that, and you can demonstrate that that's the reason you had to separate and it was reasonable, then we can deem you eligible for unemployment benefits, and that's considered attributed to the employer. That's still an involuntary separation according to the Department of Labor. The only voluntary separation is because of this currently. I did identify in the report as well that during the COVID-19 pandemic, the legislature expanded this to include separations related to the pandemic. So individuals who needed to separate because they needed to self-isolate or quarantine, if the employer, there was an unreasonable risk, that they could be exposed or become infected, if they had to care for a family member, or if they, had lost childcare. These were reasons because of the pandemic, we expanded that voluntary separation. Those have subsequently gone away. So we're back to, if you have to leave employment voluntarily to accompany your spouse, because of a military deployment or a military reassignment or a foreign service assignment, then you can be eligible for UI. So over the summer, we did a lot of research and we did a lot of outreach to these states in particular. And I'm going to highlight this paragraph because this is what I'm looking at right now. We had 37 states identify that individuals could voluntarily separate because of a domestic violence or sexual harassment circumstance. 8 states had language that we identified that allowed for a voluntary quit due to circumstances other than good cause. And then we identified 26 states have a provision that allows for benefits when an individual separates due to illness or disability of the individual or a member of the individual's family. And I also want to clarify one other thing about Vermont law currently. If you separate because of a illness or disability for yourself, you can be deemed eligible after you serve a disqualification period. So we don't consider, so if I become ill and I can't continue to do my job and I need to then separate, we consider it a medical separation and you are given a disqualification period. I believe it's anywhere from 1 to 6 weeks. I could be wrong, but we as a department have a policy where we only issue 1 week. So you're given a 1 week disqualification period. And then when you are then subsequently able and available again, you are eligible for benefits at that time. So we do currently have that in our law.
That's in statute.
Yes, sir.
Just to clarify, people have to be able and able and available to work though, after that 1 week. So if someone is actually recovering from cancer or depletes their sick leave, even if it might be that technically fall under that medical separation piece, and they are deep in chemo and can't be searching for work, they are not eligible under the current law. Correct.
And I do get into that in just shortly in the report, just making sure that just to highlight that point, which is you do have to be able and available to receive benefits, irregardless of the reason you're separated.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, we made outreach to each of the states that we identified. We got some feedback, and so I've included everything that we.
Yeah, you're
I'm starting to annoy me.
There's a lot of ambient noise. It's hard to hear. I'm sorry.
We received some feedback. We made both direct outreach to the states, so we contacted them directly, and we also did some outreach through one of our national associations, the National Association of State Workforce Agencies. So we did outreach in multiple attempts, and this is the information we got back. It's in the report, so I don't necessarily want to walk through every single state unless you would like me to. There is a graph here at the bottom that I'm going to get to, which shows some of the states and the responses that we got back. But and so not all the states that responded to us have the same language either. So for example, just using Colorado as the example here, they have a provision that allows for benefits that separate due to domestic, due to immediate family member suffering from an illness or a disability, or because of a loss of childcare due to a public health emergency. So that was a clarification or a qualification in their law. It had to be due to a public health emergency, the loss of childcare piece.
What qualifies as a public health emergency? Does a natural disaster qualify as a public health emergency?
I do not know. I would need to go dig into their law further. I can grab it and happy to share it.
Just my line of thinking is there's disaster UI obviously for involuntary separation, but what if there's a voluntary separation under some circumstances? I can imagine several that occur due to a natural or human-made disaster.
DUA is not going to cover it in that event where it's a loss of childcare. The disaster unemployment assistance program, you would have to, it has to be a separation directly related to the disaster. And I learned a lot over the DUA period this past summer and fall, where the federal government takes a very narrow interpretation of what is directly related. It essentially is only related to employment. So
I'm thinking of like your jobs in the neighboring town over, a road gets destroyed. Your commute is now tripled in length of time to get to that town. Your employer doesn't care. And so you are voluntarily leaving your employer as a result of that disaster, but you'd rather not. So
not covered. So DUA in particular would cover a situation where you were not able to get to your place of employment. But one thing we ran into during the disaster, for example, is some roads were closed, but there were very limited circumstances where somebody could prove, but I couldn't get there. In my experience, at least, this is the only DUA program I've done. The last time the department administered DUA was after Irene, so it was 10 years ago. There were some circumstances where people had their cars destroyed. And those people would be eligible because that was deemed directly associated. But in the circumstances you've outlined where your commute may be triple what it was.
that's a real life example, by the way. Just throwing that out there.
And my assumption is if that came to us, we would have denied the individual. I don't know if,
Sure.
I don't know if that person applied or not, but
You're bound
yeah.
by I understand.
So included information on these states and the ones that were able to respond to us. Some of them, for example, Delaware was able to give us the number of individuals, but they were not able to give us, or they just didn't give us benefits paid out. So I've included all of these states here, and you can look at them in the report. Also included some information on Pennsylvania. And then here's where I also wanted to note, as Representative Mulvaney-Stanek was bringing up a second ago, there is a requirement that the individual still be able and available to work. So in conversation with a lot of these states, they said, we have these provisions, but also keep in mind that the numbers may be a little deflated, because if people are deemed not eligible because they're not A and A, they may then just never come back in the door and file. And so how this works, and I'm just going to use the circumstances that were identified in the report requirements. If you leave your job because you have to take care of a family member who is ill, we're going to look at it two ways. A, is the reason that you're separating from employment eligible for UI? In the state of Vermont, we're going to say no, because you voluntarily quit. In a state where that may be a provision that's allowed, okay, you're allowed to separate voluntarily to take care of a family member, but are you able and available to work? Because if you're not able and available to work, you're not eligible for UI. So, and I think we talked a little bit about this with the committee last session. An individual comes in the door because of the separation, they may not be able and available at that time, so they may not be eligible for benefits right away, but they could subsequently become able and available once that circumstance no longer exists. So think about it, if you lose your job because of a loss of childcare, your childcare center closes, and you have to quit your job to take care of your child. You're looking for other childcare facilities. You're able to find one 4 weeks later. So the child's now going back to childcare or school, whatever it is. Now that circumstance is no longer preventing you from being able and available to work. At that point, you could then be eligible under some of these states that have those provisions. So again, just kind of called that out a little bit here. Each state's able and available laws are different. So again, it just becomes a little challenging when we're doing a one-to-one comparison from other states to what could be in Vermont. So then we get into the projected range of Vermont claims. And so there are kind of two pieces of information here in this report. First off, we also did our own study through our labor market information division. We surveyed 1,842 employers. And we asked them two questions. We asked, well, I should say it was a much larger survey, but two of the questions in the survey that we asked were to gather information related to this report requirement. We asked if they had an individual separate within the past 12 months due to a lack of childcare or due to the need to care for an aging family member. So we kind of broke that out into childcare or elder care. I know that's not exactly how the language in the proposed eligibility would be. It's not just an aging family member, but we were trying to narrow down the question so we could try to get as good of information and response as we could. So we had approximately 600 employers respond to those two questions. And what we found is that 6.1% of the employers responded yes to having an employee leave due to lack of childcare. And we had 4.2% respond yes to having an employee leave due to elder care. As an appendix to this report is a kind of mini report about the survey, and it breaks all the information down. For example, we asked them, was it more than one employee, et cetera. And so all of that data is submitted as an appendix to this report at the very end, so you can kind of go take a look at it. I won't necessarily deep dive on it for purposes of here. What we then did was we took that information. So we've got the survey, we've asked these questions, we've got these responses, and then we tried to extrapolate that out to the entire Vermont employer population to try to get an understanding of, if this is the percent of employers that have experienced this, what is the potential number of individuals that we could have file a claim for benefits based on that information? And so in working with the Joint Fiscal Office, there was a little bit of back and forth about how the information was extrapolated out and how we were weighing certain pieces of information. And what we were able to determine was, based on the percentage of answers from the employers, you could expect around 1,358 claimants filing. And then we did the best that we could, which was multiply that out by the average weekly benefit amount and multiply it by the average number of weeks we have individuals filing. That's really the only thing we can do. You know, keep in mind, they may not be able and available initially, so not all these people may file for benefits. Some of them may file, they may see that they're not able and available, and so they don't file, or they're able to get a job before they need to file. So all of this is just the best information we can give you based on what we have. So taking the averages together, if you have 1,358 claimants, 470 is the average weekly benefit amount. The average duration of benefits currently is 11.1 weeks. You get to $7.1 million. And that is a potential range of claimants and benefits you could have. A few caveats, and Representative, I know you want to jump in with a question, but I want to make sure I'm being as transparent as I can with the information. You know, we presented that to the JFO. Like I said, we worked with them. You know, I think it's reasonable to assume that that number is somewhat inflated. When you compare what other states experience, it's nowhere near that number. And so we are a small state. And so I think it's reasonable to assume that that number, the 1,300 claimants, 7.1 million, may be on the higher end of what is reasonable to assume. I do want to clarify, though, that the survey that we did was only Vermont employers with 5 or more employees and less than 1,000 employees. And so when we extrapolated that out, we were only including, I think it's around 2/3 of the Vermont economy. So what I mean by that, and it's in this footnote right here, there's approximately 25,000 private sector employees working for small employers, so less than 5 employees. There's also 46,000 public sector employees that were not included in our extrapolation. So whereas the 7.1 million, it's probably reasonable to assume it's on the high side. Also keep in mind that we only extrapolated out to about 2/3 of the Vermont economy. We left the other third off of our calculation here. So whereas it could be 7.1 million is high, again, we left a lot off. So last thing I want to mention in this section, and then happy to jump in with questions about the data that we have here. We talked with the Joint Fiscal Office. We shared with them this survey that we did, shared with them all the data, worked with them on the weighing of the information and how we extrapolated out to the 7.1 million. I think their pushback on us was that seems exceedingly high based on the information we received from other states. And as I just told you, I can understand that. This is the information they were able to pull together, not utilizing the survey data we had, utilizing the information that was given to us by the other states. And so what you can see is, here is the states that gave us information. This is their population relative to Vermont's population. Here are the number of claimants they have. Here are the benefits that they paid out on an annual basis. And then adjusting that for Vermont's population, here is an adjusted number of claimants that we could potentially expect. And here's the amount of benefits that we could potentially pay out based on the information of these states. What I will say is, and I mentioned this in the report, Massachusetts may be the best one-to-one simply because Massachusetts actually includes the language urgent, compelling, and necessitous circumstances. They have a little bit more of a qualifier in there, and I think I included it in the report. They do say that, and it is his reason, that's not my wording, I'm quoting here, the reason for leaving were such an urgent, compelling, and necessitous nature as to make the separation involuntary. So that is included in the Massachusetts, but just acknowledging that Massachusetts is the closest state to the language that you asked us to look at. Some of these other states, Delaware, for example, I think would only cover circumstances of domestic and sexual violence. So it wouldn't cover childcare, elder care. So this is the information we got, which is, based on these states, here's how much you could potentially pay out on an annual basis. Again, in efforts to make sure I'm being as transparent as possible, Oklahoma, that number they identified as probably inflated as well. They gave us number of claimants. They weren't able to give us a complete accurate number of benefits paid out. And I mentioned this up earlier in the report when I was detailing information coming from Oklahoma, that was their kind of extrapolation of averages as we did. So, and I mentioned it over here, benefits are estimated and likely too high. This came from the Joint Fiscal Office, and I agree with their assessment here. Massachusetts was the one who was able to give us probably the best data because they broke it out by month. And again, it's more of a one-to-one because they have the language urgent, compelling, and necessitous. So I will pause there.
Thank you. And thank you for being very thorough about explaining that, because one of my questions was the difference between the JFO's table and then the Department of Labor's estimates, because there is a big gap. So I'm glad I was reading the JFO's estimate correctly. So it seems, because based on those, what looks like half a dozen states or so, it looks like doing those same assumptions, the cost can range anywhere from on the low end, $100,000 to 1.2 million if you use Massachusetts, versus Department of Labor's estimate being upwards to 7 million. I guess I wonder, based on known realities, and I understand all the assumptions that your office did, it doesn't seem like there was an assumption though of the I don't know if yield's the right word, but the number of people who don't qualify. You just assumed everyone would qualify. So it seems in your assumption. So why not include something in the formula you were using to reflect the reality that lots of folks don't qualify after they go through the process and therefore get a more reasonable number.
I don't know that I am best to answer the question, because, our data, the survey, the data, the extrapolation of it, et cetera, came from our LMI shop. And so in getting into that level of information, I would want to make sure my partner in crime, Mr. Barowitz, was with me. I don't, off of my head, if he were asking me that question, I don't know how to potentially dwindle it down further, because I don't know. The biggest thing we know is that not everybody's going to apply, right? Not everybody who gets laid off applies for benefits, whether they're eligible or not, and so that was a conversation we had with JFO when we presented them with this information. We, based on the extrapolations out that we have, and we worked with them. They had feedback on how we weighted the information. And when we weighted it down and we were like, hey, initially, here's the number we get to, that was, their immediate reaction too, which was, well, we know that not everybody's going to apply for benefits. I don't know how we would build out an assumption to then dwindle this number down in an accurate way, because I don't know, for example, I can't tell you the percentage of people who separate who then apply for benefits. Like if I knew of the total population, everyone who separates, and then we knew the number of people who applied for benefits, whether they're eligible or not, we would at least know the percentage of people who are applying. And then we could use that and apply that to that number to dwindle it down further. If it's 40% of people who get laid off or separate, apply for benefits, then we know that we could assume 40% of 1358 is going to potentially apply. I don't have that information. So I would want Matt here to help dig into that question with you.
One more question. Trying to be good. So the respectful, I should say. It's my job to ask questions. So my other question is just, so since JFO, I guess the assumptions that JFO made seem very reasonable to extrapolate off of these other states who have had these similar programs, maybe not 100% the same, for however many years, at least a handful. And so tried and true and tested with all the variables that are going to be similar to Vermont's economy, where some people apply, some people don't. Some people apply and get denied. Some people aren't able and available, and whatever, life changes. And so get some more real life comparable around real versus average, right, numbers. And so I guess why did the Department of Labor not either find a mutual agreement with JFO to get somewhere in the middle, or even use JFO's analysis and recommendations of how to cut the numbers when doing a comparison against other states?
So my goal, I want to make sure I'm also reflecting our information accurately too. This is real, right? Like, ultimately, if you made me, put a lunch bet on it, I don't think that we're going to get to $7.1 million a year. But that to me doesn't mean that anything in this information is inaccurate. This is based on a survey that we did of Vermont employers, where we had, from our perspective, a pretty robust response. I mean, we had over 600 employers respond to our request for information. So this is real life. You could potentially expect to see this. I mean, another thing that's difficult to compare to is, these other states, Massachusetts tends to have a pretty high take-up rate for UI. They have the largest weekly benefit amount and the highest weekly benefit amount across the country. Whereas other states, you see lower recipiency rates for UI. For many reasons I'm sure we could get into, low weekly benefit amounts, stigma, etc. So I just want to make sure you all know, like, this information is based on actual Vermont related data. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it. My goal was to make sure I was showing both this is what we gathered, but also wanting to be fair. And we talked with JFO and they were like, hey, Because as we were talking and we were initially providing them this information, we all agreed that maybe a little inflated. How do we get some more information that we can make sure we're providing to the committee? And they said, well, one thing we could do is we could take the feedback that you've gotten from other states and we could try to break it out in this manner. And I said, yes, let's please do that so we can present it to you. So I don't, in reality, I mean, could we continue working on JFO on this to try to make additional assumptions and get to a different number? Sure. I'm not a data person, so I don't know how we do that. I would need them and Matt together to try to figure that. I don't feel like I answered your question, but
Move on.
yeah.
With respect.
I don't want to move on just yet. I like data. I am struggling with these interstate comparisons for the simple fact that the demographics of all of those states are extraordinarily different. Vermont is the second or third oldest state per capita. We're talking about elder care here. The rurality of our state. This is a frequent challenge in my line of work when we're comparing food security networks and Vermont has both a small population, but it is also extremely rural. There are very few states that are analogous to ours in terms of how we can provide funding and services to food shelves, et cetera. So I am struggling a bit with the comparisons between states. I understand there's no perfect comparison. There's just too many variables, in my opinion. That this is too diverse an array of constituencies, and I'm struggling with it. Just
So we struggle with the exact same thing. And that's where, for me, it's very challenging to get information that is going to help you make an informed decision. And that's where I'm trying to understanding Representative Mulvaney-Stanton's questions, understanding the challenges that you're highlighting too. That's where it's difficult for us to then be able to come in and say, this is it. This is what you can expect. I will say, we're doing the best that we can as a Department of Labor and a joint fiscal office. We're not a professional entity that, can go in. We couldn't hire an actuarial to come in and do a lot of analysis for this. We didn't get any funding to do that. So,
I sympathize. It
yeah.
wasn't a criticism. It was just it's extremely difficult to
Yes, sir.
discuss.
And I did not take it that way. And I think you are highlighting some of the issues that we ran into and concerns that we had. We talked about that exact point with JFO of Vermont has an aging population. They actually provided us a graph of kind of labor force participation by age. I didn't include it here because I didn't know where it would actually be helpful in this conversation. It was just, again, one piece of information, one assumption. I'm happy to share that with you all if you would like that. It's a graph of us versus Vermont and Massachusetts. But to that point,
And on the
aging state and childcare, issues you all are acutely aware of in the building, having, passed legislation last year to try to help address that. So that's the concerns that we have as a Department of Labor. We recognize all of these challenges, and our concern is that leads to a more elevated number of claimants coming in, not less.
And the inverse, we have a lower birth rate than many other states, and as such, perhaps we might be overestimating the costs associated with care for youth. So as well.
Yeah, absolutely, yes, sir.
But I do want to also just flag something that is in this report, because I think it indicates that there is a policy conundrum that we need to consider, that just even for the 600 or so employers who responded to your survey, right? And who knows if they all answered the actual questions. They did report that 6.1% of people had to leave their jobs because of the childcare crisis, meaning a lack of childcare, and had to literally leave work. I mean, no sick leave, no ability to call, grandparents, whatever it might be, and 4.2% yes to elder care. So there, as we think about helping employers and we think about helping workers, there is a need to figure out some sort of solution here. And The whole premise of the unemployment system, of course, is to help people get people back to work. But there's these periods of time which no one can plan for, that when our systems fail, like our childcare system, which we are desperately trying to fix. And when those realities happen, like how do we help people bridge that so they can afford to stay in Vermont and figure out how to pathway back to employment? And that was the whole premise really of H92, of course. But I think I do appreciate that piece of data in particular lifting up, because as you said before, it's also not even indicative of all 1,800 you surveyed, let alone the other third of the economy that you were sort of representing as well, or clarifying. So I just want to underline, there's still a thing out there that I think we should acknowledge, that folks, the workforce in particular, we can help support them as whatever way we can figure out how to do this.
And so that may be a good transition into our kind of final recommendations in the report. So just to wrap this piece up, I mean, we tried to gather as much information as we could, and we tried to make sure we were being transparent and presenting it in a manner that was not just reflective of, one side, our concerns as a department and the potential maximum that we could be looking at paying out. We also tried to be, again, transparent and reflective of the information that JFO helped pull together, and hopefully more of a one-to-one comparison to at least what other states experience who have a similar or similar laws in their state to what's in H92. So I know it's a big range, as was mentioned, it could be 100,000 all the way up to 7.1 million. That's why I mentioned at the very beginning of the report in the executive summary, the Department of Labor doesn't feel that the information we've been able to gather to date for this report is solid enough to make policy decisions based on expanding UI eligibility without further information. To transition into our summary, our conclusions or recommendations, again, that point, the administration is not supportive of expanding eligibility based on the information that we've been able to gather to date, based on the concerns that we have about the potential impact to the trust fund. There's going to be a difference of opinion on whether the UI system is designed to support individuals who are in these circumstances. The administration is not going to be supportive of expanding eligibility for people who are voluntarily leaving the workforce, even though we are sympathetic with the circumstances that they are in. That's not the purpose of the unemployment insurance program, and that's not what it was designed for, which is to cover individuals who lose their job because of being separated from employment involuntarily. I mentioned in here that obviously, as I commented on the previous report, we are supportive of moving the individuals under the Domestic and Sexual Violence Survivors Transition Program over. That program already exists, and we've kind of discussed why we feel that that would be appropriate. The concern, I will pause there. It is a policy decision that has to be made of whether you want to include individuals who leave under these circumstances in UI. The administration is not going to be supportive of it. I will also highlight, as the policy director for the department and as the UI director, my concerns with the language urgent, compelling, and necessitous. My feedback is, if you move forward with expanding for voluntary separations due to these circumstances, clearly articulate them and list them in statute. Don't give us language that is, quote, urgent, compelling, or necessitous, because that is not inclusive of everything that has been reviewed in our study or has been discussed so far in committee. I gave examples in the report. I think if you added urgent, compelling, or necessitous, we're going to get people who leave their job because of transportation issues. We're going to get people who, we had an individual file and argue that they had to quit their job because their animal was desperately ill and wanted to file for unemployment. These are not circumstances that we feel should be covered in unemployment and covered by the trust fund, because it's going to impact employers, and it's going to impact some employers very negatively, primarily the reimbursable employers, which is the state of Vermont and nonprofits that elect reimbursement and local governments. Reimbursable employers are not relieved of charges in any circumstance. So this is a voluntary separation that is not the fault of the employer. Taxable employer is going to get relieved because it is not their fault. Reimbursable employer is going to pay for it dollar for dollar. And it's not only when the person separates from that reimbursable employer, as if you all remember what happened during the pandemic, we had a lot of nonprofits who had astronomical charges of UI because individuals had voluntarily separated from the nonprofit, but ended up getting laid off later down the road. And so it's not a simple, I try to tell employers all the time, when somebody separates, you need to be aware that they may be coming in the door for unemployment insurance up to 18 months later because of how the base period wages work. So for those reasons, the administration is not going to support it and recommends not moving forward with this. I could take time and also highlight the amount of jobs that are available for individuals, the supports that you all have been putting in place to try to support individuals who find themselves in these circumstances, the child care bill that was passed last year. I sympathize with individuals who are in these circumstances, but the unemployment program is not what should be used to support them in that transition. Again, that's a policy decision. I've given you my recommendations on the language or the concerns that I have on the language in particular. I'm happy to answer any additional questions you all may have.
Sure. Thank you. So out of curiosity, I think one of the themes I'm connecting across these multiple reports is that statistics and data are a real issue ongoing right now for multiple topics. Am I not mistaken?
Well, yeah, so there is yes, sir. We have an issue at the department of data collection, data mining, being able to present information that you may want. That's an issue that's going to continue with the mainframe system we have. My concerns as it relates to this topic in particular is a lack of information on the potential impacts to the trust fund that could happen because of this. And it's without doing an extensive study that is outside of our capacity as a Department of Labor. I'm just concerned about the information, and I think the information we've presented kind of shows that concern because of the wide range of potential impacts that you have.
Okay. And in regards to the department now, when the statistics are gathered, are they done just by the department as a whole, or is it done by a designated statistician? I'm just kind of curious about the methodology because especially if it's an issue going forward, which I think would possibly impact future issues as well, these current issues, would it warrant us to see if there's any way to help further increase the efficiency of the data collection process?
Our challenges right now, so it depends on what you're wanting to look at. I mean, the challenges that we run into right now is a lack of gathering of information on claimants themselves. We've talked in the past about wanting to have information about certain races, colors, ethnicity, gender. We collect nothing on sexual orientation. So there's a lot of demographic related information that we just don't collect, and makes it very challenging, I think, for you all to then use that information and make public policy decision. For us as a department to understand how our services are impacting certain people or certain populations. It's challenging because we don't gather any of that information. It then is also very challenging for us because some stuff is entirely paper-based. The Survivors Transition Program, right? All of that information is paper-based, so it doesn't exist anywhere outside of a spreadsheet. But then also, most of our information lives in a mainframe system. And so anytime we want access to information, we have to draft up a ticket and have an ADS COBOL programmer go in there and try to data mine it. And so it just becomes extremely problematic. So that's one piece. The concern with this, expanding eligibility and trying to determine, what is the potential impact, it's the unknown. Like we don't collect information at all that's going to help you inform this decision. We don't ask people when they separate and file for unemployment. There are people that have probably separated under these circumstances and have filed for UI, and they've been denied because of a voluntary quit and an A&A issue. But if I go grab all the voluntary quits and A&A issues, that's not going to give you information on whether people are separating for these reasons. And so there's one state, I thought this was interesting, and actually I think it's Connecticut recently passed a law that, no, it may have been New Jersey. It was in our USDOL region, gathering information on all separations, not whether somebody's filing for UI or not, just gathering information from employers on every separation that occurs. If we had that type of information, then you could data mine all of it and then help extrapolate out, well, as we were talking, what's the percentage of people that file for UI versus all separations in total? And that can help give you a little more information to understand if you're going to expand eligibility, what are the impacts? But we don't gather that. So it's the unknown. And so that is one of the challenges.
And I give you a lot of credit for working with that, because especially we have a situation where your department has to deal with an antiquated machine that has to be manually fed a ticker, while also dealing with data with having no formal training statistician trying to process that data. I give you a lot of credit for dealing with that. That sounds frustrating.
So I will take the quick time to just say, we do have our LMI division, and there's a lot of amazing folks that work there, and they do amazing work to try to extrapolate out and provide information based on what we do have, but it becomes challenging to be able to provide you all up-to-date information based on questions that you have. That's not just like a standard report that we do. It becomes very challenging. So I appreciate that.
Well, we appreciate it. If there's anything that we can do, maybe it might be a discussion worth for the future, Mr. Chair. If there's anything that we can do to try to possibly expand the data set and help make your job easier and give us more information to be able to judge our future policies from.
New system.
System.
Yes, sir. Yes.
When someone separates and files, then the employer receives a notice and has to respond. And so what happens to that data?
It is just initially used to validate the reason for separation. So it's primarily for us, it's used as a fraud prevention tool. So what I mean by that is if Cameron Wood files for unemployment insurance benefits, and Chair Marcotte, let's say I work for you, you're right, our system will generate, if I've listed you as the separating employer, it will generate a notice to your business identifying that Cameron Wood has filed and asking you for information on the separation. And so initially it's a way for us, you may call us and say, Cameron Wood never separated from employment. And now all of a sudden we have a potential, ID theft issue that we need to look into. The other thing is, if I say that I'm filing because I've been laid off, and you respond and say, I wasn't laid off, I was fired because I stole money out of the cash register, then now we know that we have a dispute and we have a potential involuntary separation, a separation issue that we need to investigate. And so, because if the employer never responds, we basically go off what the claimant tells us. And so we run into that all the time, where claimant says, I've been laid off, employer says, no, you were fired. And then we have to investigate. It comes back to us usually on a form. Some employers file electronically. That's actually one of the other great benefits we're going to have with the new system. We'll be able to send that information electronically. Employer will be able to go in online, fill it out, as opposed to having to handwrite it, piece of paper, and send it back to us. So when we get it back, staff review it, make sure there's no issues that need to be put on the claim, and then it gets scanned and kept, but it's not, unfortunately, the information isn't being logged in a manner that allows us to then go back and research and investigate and data mine it, et cetera.
So in the new system, we'll be able to do that?
We should be able to. I mean, we'll have better tools because again, we'll be able to do it electronically. So anytime we're doing stuff like that electronically, it's got to live in a database somewhere. We should be able to mine it, et cetera. Even with a lot of these modern document management systems, they have all this metadata in the document. So you can go in and see like how many forms are returned with lack of childcare on the form, and we'd be able to see stuff like that. But so yes, sir, with a new system, hopefully that will be able to give us a lot more information.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of data that is already in forms that are sent in by both. And they're just not being logged in.
It's all paper.
Yeah, so I think that'll be a huge benefit for us down the road. I wonder how many people that are in these circumstances that don't quit, that, tell the employer, I've got this issue, and then just don't show back up to work again. They don't quit. Actually, the employer says, well, you're not coming, you're fired. And if they file for unemployment, then they're gonna go in as a involuntary leave.
We run into that all the time too. I mean, like, that's one of the challenging things that our staff have to do when you don't have a clear separation. You have, claimant interpret something the employer said as you're fired, and the employer says you stop showing up to work, and there's no clear, here's the resignation, or here's the paper where you're discharged. All the time we run into that where our staff have to try to determine A, when the separation was, and B, who is then the actual cause of it. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Cameron, would you be more receptive to expanding this program if you had more money?
Administrative money or money in the trust fund, or
There happens to be a bill on the wall in this committee right now that is a short form bill that proposes to create a study committee to analyze the creation of a fund that could be used by the Department of Labor to provide a reserve for the unemployment trust fund during periods of high unemployment, and to support the UI program by providing funding for the acquisition of information technology upgrades, maintenance of existing information technology, improvement of services, and fraud prevention, amongst other needs. So I wonder if Representative Mulvaney Stanik's bill that would create those more expansive terms that bound the voluntary separation piece, if there were a reserve fund of some sort, if the administration would be more receptive.
What's that bill number?
That bill number is H576.
I am 100% supportive of any and all conversations that give our UI division more flexibility when it comes to funding, both for the trust fund and admin funding. One of the biggest challenges that we run into and have historically is administrative funding of the program. There are certain units that we have that run on bare minimum staff. And it becomes an extreme challenge when we then run into an issue that somehow impacts those areas. If you have a unit of 4 or 5 people and one person goes out on FMLA for an extended period of time, or one person gets another job or leaves, and then you have a period in which you're trying to recruit, you've lost 20 to 25% of your workforce right there in that unit. And so when we're operating on bare minimum capacity, it makes things very challenging. So anything that gives us more flexibility and funding, 100% for it. I've pitched to USDOL many times that I think states that have adequate reserves in their trust fund should be able to utilize those monies in different ways. still related to unemployment, but whether it's fraud prevention or as your things that are in your bill. So I'm 100% for that. I can say that I cannot speak for the governor's office in this sense. I don't think that is going to bring them around to supporting this. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's just a question about the purpose for the UI program. And it is there for, again, individuals who separate due to economic circumstances is what it was designed for. It's not designed to cover every personal circumstance for individuals that find themselves having to separate from the workforce. And the impacts of that are real in that, as I mentioned, reimbursable employers will pay for it. And depending on the usage, and I mentioned this in the report, when benefits are paid out and they're not attributed to an employer, they get socialized to everyone else. So what I mean by that is when you're paying out benefits and they're not being replenished back either from a reimbursable or from higher taxes from a taxable employer, it impacts the calculations that go into what's the taxable wage base and what tax schedule are going to be at. And so if you're socializing those costs out to everyone else, it could be the difference between going from tax schedule 3 for an employer down to tax schedule 1, because benefits have been paid out and now we're doing the calculation. And if they haven't been replenished, the trust fund's not where it wants to be. So we're going to keep taxes higher. And that has real consequences. We talked to the committee after the pandemic. We were going to go from schedule 1 to schedule 5. That was going to triple most employers' taxes. We were able to work with the committee and we made some adjustments to the removing 2020 from the calculations of taxes needed. And so we went from schedule 1 to schedule 3. That was still a doubling for most employers. And so the question just becomes, when these things get socialized and they're not accounted for, it can be the difference, it can be a significant difference for employers when you're talking about when the tax schedules go up, how long do they stay up and how quickly they come down. So I don't think the administration is going to be supportive when you look at the current state of our workforce, when there is 8,000, 9,000 jobs available for individuals. We understand that people, may need to separate for these circumstances, but at the end of the day, I don't think the administration is going to be supportive of the employers having to then cover for that separation. That's not the employer's fault either. And when those individuals are in a position where they're ready to get back to work, there are many jobs available for them. That's going to be the administration's position.
I just wonder if a reserve fund might mitigate the socialization of costs if expanding the UI.
Yes,
don't have to
sir.
answer.
No. Yes, sir, it could if you set it up that.
Sure. Thank you.
It'll just depend on where the funds are coming from.
Yes, it would, Mr. Chair. Yes, it would.
I think, one thing we have to recognize is the trust fund of where it's at. And we know that we've had a shrinking workforce, which means there's less tax dollars coming into the trust fund as well, so. We need to get that report sometime in the near future from Matt and.
UI trust fund report will be coming to you before the end of the month. So we should have it in next week.
Schedule.
Yes, sir.
Always want that one in person. Have that discussion. Lindsay, is Kelly on? No. Did she ever get on?
No, she did acknowledge she received a link.
Oh, okay. No, we only have 5 minutes anyway, so we'll hear from Kelly. Any other questions before we sign off? Cameron. Great, Cameron, thank you for.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
It was a good discussion.
Always a pleasure for you.
Good time.